Hello friends, it's Kayla. I'm so excited to hang out with you today. I feel like we haven't seen each other enough this month. My whole channel reading situation was a total mess this month. I kind of like canceled a couple of videos that ended up affecting a lot of the content for this month, and I ended up not really having a set TBR for the entire month. So I picked up a lot of things at random, bumped up some videos. You've seen me talk about a lot of the books that I read in videos already. But if you remember last month, I was excited that all of the books that I read fit into my little basket, even though there was like, I don't know, 13 of them. This time there's only 7 and they still fill the basket. I somehow read some of the thickest books of the year. Some of the thickest books that I've read this year, I read this month. That's what, yeah. Did that sentence make sense? Let's start with the books that I've already talked about so I can just refer you to some vlogs for some more thoughts. So I read Places No One Knows by Brenna Yavinoff. I was challenged to read this. I did a whole vlog around it and I ended up, spoilers for that video, not loving it, but it was a fun time regardless. My final rating is somewhere around 2.75 stars, which doesn't equate to a book that I actively hated or disliked. It was just kind of okay. In the story, we're following 2 teenage characters and it's their love story and it's a little bit magical. So there's a boy and a girl and they have kind of difficult home lives and different like run in different social circles at school. But in her dreams, kind of, Waverly can travel to different places and visits him, and it's kind of like a secret romance. But it's also like they don't even know if it's real or not. So they'll see each other at school and like not really interact. But then at nighttime, like they're together. The book hinges on like their romance. It's a character-driven, romance-driven storyline. And that is like the bulk of the book. So if you're not convinced of their relationship or you don't love their dynamic, like it's just not gonna work. So even though I love real world with a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of magic, this was just average for me. While I do appreciate a lot of things about this, like the main character having a lot of like social awareness and like just talking about like the game that you play in high school and her like where she fits into the high school dynamics is all really interesting. It was all interesting enough for me to finish the book, just not have any real feelings towards it. Next up, another high school love story that I read is The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre by Robin Talley. The next 3 books I read for a vlog where I was reading authors for the 3rd time, authors that I felt lukewarm about previously, and I wanted to see if the 3rd book from them that I read was going to, you know, change my perspective. It didn't for Robin Talley. While again, lots of things to appreciate in here. We've got lots of queer rep, we've got theater, we've got conversations about like expectations and coming of age, discovering what you really want in life conversations. So Melody is like a stage manager and she's putting on Les Mis, and there's lots of actor dynamics, and because every single time they have a poor production, it happens to take place when Melody's in a relationship, she agrees to not get into a new relationship or fall in love during this production. And of course there is a girl who shows up who throws her entire plan out the window. And again, the relationship itself, like if you're not on board, if you don't love their dynamic, if you aren't falling in love with these characters from the very beginning, like that's what the book hinges on so much. So I continue to feel lukewarm about it. I feel like I'm spoiling my whole vlog, which is not fun because I want you to go watch it if you haven't already. Let's go to my favorite one from the video, The Only Black Girls in Town by Brandy Colbert. So in this one, we're following a girl who is a part of the only black family in her small town, and then a new girl moves to town and she is from like a big city and she's unfamiliar with the small town dynamics and she misses where she came from, but they end up becoming fast friends and learning a lot from each other and working together to solve this little mystery. It's very sweet. It's a middle grade. It covers a lot of really good topics from surrogacy and family dynamics to microaggressions and racism they're experiencing. There's a whole nother section, part of the mystery, or the mystery that they're solving, is this woman. They find a bunch of letters from her written in like the 50s, and they're trying to track down this woman and what her secret was, because she's hiding something, and she's just like telling this story about how she's moving around and how she's going about life and how she's being perceived and these secrets that she's keeping. This I ended up giving 5 stars. Like, the pace of it was perfect. All of the different voices were super distinct. Everyone got adequate page time. We had really dynamic characters, and I just thought it was one of the best middle grades that I've read. And then we have After the Silence by Louise O'Neill, which is, how do I explain this story? Nessa Crowley is a young woman who was murdered. There was this party, there was this power outage, they were cut off from the mainland, and then eventually this woman's lifeless body is found, and it seems pretty clear like what happened to her, and everybody has their opinions of what happened to her. So we're getting to read some of that and the build up to that moment, and then we're also 10 years in the future where there's a documentary crew who have come to the island, and they're like interviewing people and solving the mystery. It's a pretty like straightforward story, and again, I appreciate so much of what was in here. So many of the conversations that we got to have about class and privilege, but I wanted it to be more of a thriller. So what I'm realizing when I pick up crime fiction is that they can go in 2 different directions. You can have crime fiction that is mystery thriller focused, suspenseful, and like that's what I wanted, a little like gimmicky, like I wanted that feeling from this. But then there's crime fiction that is more, just reads like a intense, like hard-hitting contemporary story where you can see where it's going the entire time, and the author has a clear intent with the book and conversations she wants to have, and I can definitely appreciate that, but I don't often love the reading experience itself. So like this could be compared to things like Where the Crawdads Sing and Beartown, which are a whole group of books that have a crime at the forefront but aren't intended to give you that edge of your seat atmosphere. I ended up giving this like a 2.75. I don't think there was anything objectively wrong here. So those are the 4 books you already heard from me about this month, and then I have 3 that I have read and haven't told you anything about. Also, I just remembered I asked you on Instagram if you had any questions for me, and I should probably look at that. Okay, perfect. None of them are about the books I already talked about, probably because I vlogged them and you don't want to hear about them anymore. Okay, great. Where to start? Here. I know you want me to talk about House of Leaves, but I'm gonna make you wait until the end. So let's talk about my 2 pre-orders of the month, 2 of my super anticipated reads of 2021. Concrete Rose I was so excited about because The Hate U Give is one of my favorite books. I give it 5 stars. Maverick is one of my favorite characters. Book and movie, I just have always wanted to see his like origin story, and I'm just so glad I got to read it. With that said, I want a prequel to the prequel, because I want like, I want 50 more pages or even 100 more pages at the beginning of this book, because I loved it so much and it was over way too fast. So I'm giving it 4.5 stars. It was almost perfect, but there are a couple like relationships he goes through in here, and I just wanted a little bit more of one of the relationships so much. I can't remember like how much in The Hate U Give you know the origin of everything. So I do want to be careful, because there was even a moment that happened in here that I was like, oh my god, I forgot that that's a thing. But the main portion of the plot and what's discussed in the synopsis is that he finds out he's going to be a father, and he has to decide what kind of life that he's going to make for himself as a father. He is pretty much left to raise this child on his own, and I feel like that's a story that we've gotten to hear a lot with female main characters. So I just think in general it's really cool that we get to see it from this perspective, and somebody who is trying to do the right thing but also do what they feel is going to be successful for them, and also dealing with the pressures of everything around them. We talk about like the cycle of incarceration and gangs and drugs, and how there are certain expectations. And there's even this whole section that's my favorite part, talking about how men, especially black men, are not supposed to show emotion and who are supposed to come off in a certain way. And all of those conversations and the decision to be more like vulnerable is so important. Seeing him navigate school and work and becoming a parent and relationships and all of the family dynamics, it was really powerful, and it had a really good payoff having read The Hate U Give, and seeing how certain interactions between Star and her dad were motivated by experiences in Maverick's upbringing. So what you asked me on here is pretty much the expected comment that's like, if you want to read this and The Hate U Give, which one should you read first? Or can you read this without reading The Hate U Give? And I actually think that you could go either way. I know that everyone's going to say to read The Hate U Give first, because there are definitely characters in that book that it's cool to revisit them in here, and you get more context for the people that you already know in The Hate U Give. But I truly think that you can read it in either order. This can be a standalone story. It's just as powerful on its own. Another one was like, how would I rank all of Angie Thomas's books? Which I can't even remember what I gave on the come up now. I want to say it was 4 stars, but if I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. I'm pretty sure I would rank them, The Hate U Give, Concrete Rose, and On the Come Up. Enjoyed all of them. I will forever pick up Angie Thomas. I'm pretty sure she said recently that she's writing fantasy right now, which is incredible. Next up, I read Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Bully. And this is like a YA mystery crime story taking place in the Ojibwe community. As you can see, it's the Reese's YA book club pick with not a real sticker. So I am so happy for this author. The fact that this got picked up for the Reese's Book Club, it had like I don't even remember, like 10 or 15 publishing house auction or whatever. It's currently being developed by Netflix. Like, I think it's incredible that Indigenous literature is being supported in every genre. We need more Indigenous voices in every genre. So in this, we're following a character named Donis, and she witnesses a murder, and she ends up being invited to be kind of a like secret informant for the FBI, and she is helping find out what's going on with this like drug ring. There's a lot of hardship going on in the community, some drug related and some otherwise, and Donis has an important role in her community, and when working with the FBI has such a different perspective because she is looking, you know, generations ahead, and how the impact of all of these things is going to affect her community. And that's not necessarily what the FBI, regardless of the fact that they are also Indigenous and seemingly have good intention with this investigation, she just brings something completely different to it. And they're using her to like look into different traditional medicines and kind of infiltrate the community to see like what's really going on. Donis is an incredibly written main character. She's super multi-layered. Her interests are so dynamic. She's a character you really get to know so well, and that is the absolute strongest part of this book. It is own voices, so you know that everything that you're hearing about and everything that you're getting taught throughout this story is like genuine. So if you're somebody who already loves like YA mystery, thriller, crime stories, and you want to expand the type of authors and the type of main characters that you're reading and reading from, like this is perfect for you. For me, Well, I have so many great things to say about this story, and it did everything so well, and it was culturally rich, and it did bring up so many great conversations, and I love so much how language was integrated in a great, authentic, bold way without like the glossary and the index. Like, you can take context clues to understand the language, and listening to it for a bit on the audiobook was a super great experience for me. The actual storyline itself fell into a lot of like the YA mystery tropes that I already don't love, like just over convenient things, explanations just regarding like the investigation portions that I just found it hard to get on board with. And then the romance, which I didn't enjoy. I hate that I'm giving it 3 stars because it just sounds shitty. Like, I know how shitty it comes across when there is finally a unique story with representation you might not necessarily have seen before that is getting deserved attention, and then somebody says like, oh well, this shouldn't have had a romance, or this had tropes, and it's like, yeah, but every YA mystery has done that before, so it should be allowed to do all of those things, and that's completely correct. But I almost always have issues with that in YA mystery thrillers. So when I pick them up, I'm selective about the ones that I do because I want something different, and I got something different, and there's so much to love about this. But considering how long it was, I thought this was going to be set up for success for me because it would have more pages to really like flesh out the things that I normally take issue with. But instead, I got hundreds of pages of really, really great explorations of identity and family dynamics, and the sense of community was so beautifully expanded upon. But the things that I don't love about YA thrillers still existed in here. Somebody just asked, would you recommend Firekeeper's Daughter? And I absolutely would. For people who would, the normal people who would pick this up because they think they're gonna love it probably will love it. Everyone's talking about how beautiful the cover is, and I completely agree. Okay, and then somebody asked, it's in the YA section, but I've been told it reads more like an adult literary thriller. Ooh, that's tough because I think it is marketed at the right audience, but I think it has great crossover potential. If we wanted as a community to actually fully start using the new adult tag properly, this would fall into that. It's hard because a lot of times when books deal with some really difficult topics, like this one, there's murder and there's gun violence, drug use, sexual assault, people tend to say it's not for a younger audience when those are things that younger people, survivors, have experienced. I think its marketing is intentional and appropriate. Lastly, here we are with House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. My favorite thing is that you have no clue like what I thought of this book, and I love the suspense of that I could say anything right now. I could say this was a 1 star, I could say this was a 5 star, I could say this was a 3 star, and I have given you just no inclination as of yet of how I actually felt about this. So while I will be saving my full thoughts, I have a lot of thoughts for the live show. It's going to be in the second half of April. So if you haven't read this yet, if you haven't completed it yet, you still have time, and I really, really hope that you finish it because this is one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. All time! I have been holding off the desire to scream about this book for weeks because, for a couple reasons, and I put off this wrap up for a couple reasons. I read this in a very controversial way, and I wanted to make sure that as I was reading, and as I was pretty sure it was going to be 5 stars, I wanted to make sure that it actually was, through my second read of it, which I just completed. Because if I read it the way that I read it and then I didn't like it, the House of Leaves purists would have absolutely come for me and told me that the way that I read it is the reason I didn't like it. So I'm really glad the way that I read it, though House of Leaves purists still don't come for me because I'm not recommending that everybody does this, okay? I'm not. You can read House of Leaves however you want. I don't even want to talk about my thoughts. I want to help guide the people who are still working through this. So I did include some of this in my Instagram post, but once you get to like the 150 page mark, I promise you it picks up and you will be more immersed, and then you'll fly through it, like I swear. And if you're going into it and you feel intimidated, I think it would be encouraging for you to know that there's like 100 pages of this book that are almost completely blank, and there's 200 pages that are just images and poems and letters and this super long index that you're not technically even going to read. So while it is still an ambitious book to read, I think some people would be encouraged to know that like you don't actually have to read every section of it if you're not enjoying what you're reading in the moment. I do think that the way that you're intended to read this is like, there's no one right way to read this, okay? But people will say that like read it the way it's supposed to be read, where you're reading the story and you're reading the footnotes and you're reading the other story, and continue that way, and then you're gonna flip here and then you're gonna go back and then you're gonna flip over here and then you're gonna go back. That's how it's a labyrinth of an experience. It's intentionally written this way for you to be frustrated, for you to be confused, because it just mimics the actual story that you're reading, your reading experience. But basically there's 3 things going on in here, and I have yet to watch anyone discussing this book. I haven't delved into the forums. I haven't gone there yet. So some of my interpretation could be wrong. Some of my pronunciation's probably wrong. But before the live show, you bet your bottom dollar that I am fully diving into this experience. So you're reading this collection of materials from Zampano, and he is putting together his explanation of this footage that this guy Navidson or whatever photojournalist, he took these videos of a house that he moved into with his family, and they discover some of the measurements are off and the house is bigger on the inside than the outside, and there are all these like video clips that are being explained to you. And then there's more footage and more people end up being involved, and they explore this house and all of the extra rooms, etc. that they find. And then there are also footnotes from Zampano, and then there's also footnotes from this guy named Johnny, and the book kicks off from Johnny's perspective. When you see the Courier font, that's Johnny reading through all of this stuff, and it gets like confusing because there's like footnotes inside footnotes, and then you have to read through like Johnny reading the stuff, and then you end up having to go back a couple pages and back to where you were with Zampano's story. But if you're really struggling through Johnny's perspective, because it rambles, he starts talking about what he's reading and viewing, but then he just goes into his own personal life and personal stories. That is a part of the book and it's important, but I feel like if you want to skim some of that, I think you're warranted in that, and everyone would agree that you're warranted in that. This is the type of book that you don't really read once. Like, I am currently in my 3rd pass of the book, because like by the end you do need to understand Johnny's story for the end to have the impact that it does. So that's the way that you should be reading it, right? Okay. What I did is I not only skimmed or skipped people are gonna come for me, Johnny's footnotes. I skipped all of the footnotes. All of them. I think this is the type of book that you're... Okay, I need to defend myself. I feel like this is the type of book that you are supposed to take your time reading. If you have the time and you're reading it properly, like do that. But if you are really struggling and maybe you're at like 50 pages in, which is when I decided to read it differently, what I'm gonna recommend to a select few of you is only read the story in the house and the footage, and skip every single footnote, not just Johnny's, but all of them. And only do this if you are reading it quickly and you're somebody with a good memory. It's a very specific person who I think can read it this way. And I really think that while I didn't read it as intended, it gave me so much harder of an impact. I'm gonna give you a clip of me reading Holloway's tape because it ruined my life. I do not have a visceral reaction to books very often. I don't cry. I don't gasp. I wasn't even planning on including that footage in anything. I was just filming myself in the reading process. Like, I'm playing copywritten music in that clip. There's just some portions of the book that are like upside down, you have to turn it, and I thought it would be like a funny, fun clip, but then I left the camera rolling by accident for like an hour because I got so immersed and it ruined me. It reminded me a lot of my experience with A House at the Bottom of a Lake. Like, that footage and just that portion of the book could be its own story. And it is its own story. And you're not supposed to skip the footnotes because throughout it you see all of these little numbers and they have a thing at the bottom that references a book or references an image, or that's when you have to flip around. But for me, the footnotes started taking me out of the horror that was the footage. With that said, I would still read like Johnny's first like opening portion, like the first 50 pages, read as intended. But if you're really still struggling at that point, you can't finish the book in its entirety without reading Johnny's stuff. So you're gonna get near the end and then you're gonna have to start over with a second pass. And if you are doing it that way and you're okay with reading it with a pen in hand, either way, if you're reading it as intended, you're gonna wanna read it with some post-its so you can remember where you were when you're having a flash back and forth. But if you wanna read it my way, I would have a marker in hand so you can mark the footnote numbers, and then in your second pass through when you're reading the footnotes, you don't have to search the page for the reference point. And this is why I say you have to have a good memory, because like obviously you're supposed to see the tiny number 10 and go to the bottom and then continue the book. But since it was distracting me, like as it was supposed to distract me, I get that, it made me lose the on edge feeling that I had. But I have a good enough memory that in my second pass and then reading all of the footnotes, being able to quickly reference those little numbers, I knew what the sentence was and I knew what the footnote was talking about. So I really wouldn't recommend it for everybody. I really want to drive that home. And reading it that way is also going to make you lose learning from the appendixes, like you're going, or the appendices. You're gonna skip like all of the little poems and images and all of that. I actually found it really valuable to read all of that as one chunk at the very end. And I know that's not going to be everybody's perspective. But now in my third pass, I'm fully reading Johnny's perspective and his life, because his stuff is in the footnotes, but then sometimes there's a footnote within his footnote, or the footnote takes you to another section of Johnny. And if you're not reading Johnny at all, the footnotes are going to completely throw you off. So pass 1 was just the story. Pass 2 was the footnotes from Zampano and a little bit of Johnny. Like I still skimmed Johnny the second time through. And now the third time through, I'm really reading every single thing from Johnny, which is like obnoxious, and he's not a character that anybody enjoys reading. But to finish the book and get the full effect, like you obviously have to understand Johnny's story. And I just don't want to talk about the plot at all until that live, because I really want to dive into the moments and the characters and everything with all of you. So if you haven't felt the most encouraged to finish, I hope that I gave you a little bit of hope. Once I decided to switch how I read it, I read that entire like footage portion in like 2 days. It had me laughing, it had me crying, it had me genuinely freaked out. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. Like everyone's been telling me that for years, and you were right. And I'm so glad that I did it. I'm so glad I did it with all of you, so the live show can be like really thorough with everybody. And now I'm ready for people to just attack me for how I just told some people to read it. However you end up reading it, whatever you do, like I believe in you. You got this. You can do it. It's intimidating, but I think you can work your way through it, and it's at the end not going to be as ambitious as you thought it was. So that's everything that I read this month. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I gave you some good insight that you were looking for. If not, I don't know what to tell you. I just realized you asked a lot of questions on House of Leaves and I probably didn't answer them. But I think for most people, they're just asking like, is it worth it? And for me, it obviously was. And I'm so happy that this has happened. So I will see you later. Let me know any of your thoughts on any of the books I read. Bye.